a wrecked Bugatti Chiron sitting in a garage, stripped to its bare frame and split clean down the middle, with a YouTube creator standing over it, holding a spanner while the camera captures every bolt and every panel. That single image was enough to send one of the most fiercely protected brands in the automotive industry into full defensive mode, and what followed turned into one of the most watched, most argued about car rebuild stories the internet has produced in years. The fight between an independent builder working out of a garage, a manufacturer that sells the most expensive production cars on earth, and a young chief executive caught between his public persona and his corporate obligations has layers that the viral clips never came close to capturing, and understanding all of them changes the entire story. The car carries a salvage rebuild title, a legal designation that means it is cleared to return to public roads once the restoration is complete. What makes that detail so telling is that Bugatti examined the car before the insurance company wrote it off, which means the manufacturer had direct knowledge that whoever bought it at auction was going to attempt a rebuild. There was no ambiguity about what was coming. And yet, instead of purchasing the car themselves and keeping it out of the public eye, which their service revenue would have made effortless given the $20,000 annual service bills running through their workshops, Bugatti allowed it to go to auction, watched it sell, and then spent the months that followed arguing that the rebuild posed an unacceptable safety risk. If that concern was genuine, buying the car back was always the obvious solution, and the decision not to do so made every subsequent argument about safety considerably harder to take at face value. Understanding the relationship between the rebuilder and Matty Rémac, the young chief executive who heads Bugatti, requires going back to where things stood before the car was ever purchased. Both are car people at their core, genuinely absorbed in the world of hypercars, high-performance engineering, and everything that orbits that space. They had spoken online before any of this became a public dispute. They share mutual friends inside the automotive world. The rebuilder described it himself as a Messi and Ronaldo situation, where two people who are probably fine with each other personally get turned into rivals the moment the media and the corporate machine get involved. The dynamic between them was never naturally adversarial, and what broke it was not personal tension between the two men. It was the moment institutional interests entered the conversation, and Mate's ability to act on his own judgment was removed. When Matty had originally made contact, the message was that if the team bought the car, he would work something out on the parts side, and they would figure out the details together. Alex received the same assurance independently. Then the car arrived, filming started, and the commitment evaporated almost overnight. The most plausible explanation is that Matty went up the chain, reached the Porsche and Volkswagen group side of the ownership structure, and was told that providing factory components to a filmed independent rebuild of a wrecked Chiron was not something the brand was prepared to stand behind. Matty then had to return to the team and walk back what he had said, and had to publicly defend a position that he had privately contradicted. That sequence, more than anything else in the whole dispute, explains why the tone shifted so sharply and so completely the moment the car entered the garage. The official justification Bugatti gave was safety. Their argument was that they could not sell parts for a repair they had no oversight over, because they could not guarantee the finished car would meet their standards on a public road. The rebuilder pointed out immediately that this reasoning collapses when you look at how every other performance manufacturer handles the same situation. Porsche sells parts to independent builders. Lamborghini sells parts to independent builders. In both cases, the buyer forfeits their warranty, accepts the liability personally, and the transaction ends there. The rebuilder had already offered to sign documentation, making it explicit that Bugatti bore no responsibility for the repair and that all liability rested entirely with him. The answer was still no, which made clear that the concern was never really about safety in the first place. The Paul Walker connection brought a different dimension to the conversation. Walker died in a Porsche Carrera GT in 2013, and the legal proceedings that followed involved extensive testimony about suspension components, structural integrity, and potential manufacturing defects. Those proceedings produced recalls and years of brand-level damage for Porsche. Given that Porsche holds a significant ownership stake in Bugatti through the Volkswagen Group, and given that the litigation from that crash would have been deeply familiar to everyone in that ownership structure, There is a reasonable case that nobody in that organization wanted any proximity to a scenario where a rebuilt Chiron appeared in an accident headline. Whether that history is directly shaping the Bugatti position, nobody can confirm, but the logic connects in a way that is genuinely difficult to dismiss. The $600,000 offer came after the part's refusal, and it was, by any fair reading, an extraordinary proposal. Ship the car to the Bugatti workshop in Croatia or France, pay $600,000, and receive a fully rebuilt Chiron back with the factory stamp on every component. That number sounds enormous until you hold it against what a standard service costs, and then it starts looking suspiciously low, which is exactly what it was. Every experienced builder understands that stripping a damaged car reveals problems that were invisible before the work began, and every new discovery adds cost with no fixed ceiling above it. A starting figure of $600,000 on a car that had been split in half was never going to stay at $600,000. Beyond the money, the truly significant part of the offer had nothing to do with price. Once the car left for France, Alex would have lost all access to it, all visibility into what the team found or what they changed, all control over the timeline, and every piece of content that made the purchase financially possible. Accepting would have handed Bugatti complete control over a story they had been trying to suppress since the car first appeared at auction, and it would have done it in a way that looked entirely voluntary from the outside. Alex published the $600,000 figure publicly, and that decision fractured whatever remained of the working relationship between him and Matty. Bugatti customers arriving for routine maintenance at standard rates were now encountering headlines about a full car rebuild being offered for $600,000, and the contrast made the brand look uncomfortable in front of its own clientele. Matty had built a substantial portion of his public identity around transparency, around showing the inside of manufacturing facilities that brands like Lamborghini had always kept locked away. And suddenly, he was the face of an offer that read like a brand trying to buy its way out of public scrutiny. Having that figure shared openly, after he had given his private word on parts, put him in a position that was genuinely difficult to defend from any direction. The response video was the moment the internet took complete ownership of the narrative. Whatever Matty intended when he made it, how those clips spread was outside his control the moment they were posted. The content that moved fastest was the kind that cut his statements about what the car could not safely do directly against footage of the team doing exactly those things. His point about structural risk was placed next to footage of the car split in half. His concern about the car reaching 200 miles per hour after an independent rebuild was placed against footage of the car preparing to do exactly that. The algorithm rewarded the conflict, audiences ran with it, and by the time most people encountered the story, it read like a clean rivalry between a garage and a supercar empire. The rebuilder acknowledged that the sharpest clips never came from anything he had said out loud. They came from editing decisions made by others, and the real situation underneath was far more complicated and considerably less hostile than the highlight reel suggested. What the rebuild threatens most for Bugatti has always been less about safety liability and more about what the camera reveals when the car is pulled apart. The engineering inside a Chiron is genuinely impressive. The precision and the quality of assembly at that level is beyond what most workshops in the world could approach, and the rebuilders said as much directly. But alongside that, engineering sits a component list that connects to the Volkswagen Group's wider catalog, with parts available at prices that bear no visible relationship to what appears on a Bugatti service invoice. Showing that publicly, across multiple videos watched by the exact demographic that owns and services these cars, is an exposure of the luxury automobile pricing structure that the brand had no good way to respond to constructively. The entire market for cars at this level depends on the distance between what something actually costs to build and what customers believe it costs to build, and a filmed rebuild collapses that distance completely and permanently. For the rebuilder, the position is strong from every direction available. If no legal action materializes, the build continues, the audience grows, and the car reaches the road as one of the most thoroughly documented Chiron restorations ever filmed. If Bugatti does pursue any action, the attention generated in a single week would outrun anything the channel would produce organically across the same period. The rebuilder said this openly himself, And the part that makes it genuinely fascinating is that the people at Bugatti almost certainly arrived at the same conclusion on their own. Their cleanest exit was always to say nothing, offer a quiet word of support for the project, and allow the story to run its natural course. The moment the response video went live, that option closed permanently, and what had started as a garage project became a broader conversation about brand power, engineering transparency, and whether a luxury automobile manufacturer can dictate what a private owner does with a car they legally purchased at a legitimate auction. Matty Rémac earned his reputation by making electric vehicle performance credible at the hypercar level, by bringing a degree of openness to manufacturing that the traditional automotive world had never practiced, and by connecting with an audience the established industry had historically ignored entirely. Every quality that built that reputation is exactly what made the response video feel miscalculated. The rebuilder's audience was never his opposition. They were precisely the people he had spent his career trying to reach. Somewhere between his own instincts and the decisions handed down from the ownership structure above him, that connection got lost, and the car now sits in a garage with a camera pointing at it and several million people watching to see what the next video brings.